swift master quickness. Surely there are people in Scientology who have experienced real trauma in their lives, sexual or physical abuse, loss of a loved one, etc. From what I have gathered so far, Scientologists are taught to bottle up emotions from the reactive mind. So how are these auditing sessions handled if a person is rightly becoming emotional from reliving these painful experiences? That's a good question, because it is a chance for me to clarify some of what happens in Scientology's auditing sessions. Because a lot of what gets talked about with Scientology in terms of what's done with that e-meter and what is done in auditing is confessionals or sec checks, the security checks that Scientology does, where they're pulling all of your crimes and moral transgressions and things like that. And while that can act as auditing, there's a whole range of things. There's a whole nother set of processes or commands or actions that are done in Scientology that are supposed to be therapeutic and are not designed to just pull your crimes or your transgressions, but are meant to help relieve stress, spiritual trauma, emotional upset, and things like that. I don't know one Scientologist who hasn't had some kind of emotional trauma or upset or problem in their past or in their life. Generally speaking, that's why they're in Scientology, is to get that dealt with and get it gone out of their head, not erased where they don't remember it anymore, but trying to relieve the trauma and the stress of it. So to that end, Scientology auditing is designed to basically take a person and run them back through or re-experience the incident in one fashion or another. I say that because there's different ways of going about doing this, which I don't need to get into all the details of it. Dianetics literally has a person go back and relive the experience over and over again. There are other things that Scientology does where they will address different aspects or different parts of the painful or emotional incident and try to strip off, what they call charge, emotional charge, upset, the emotional investment a person has in the incident. And if that doesn't fly, they'll look for earlier incidents of a similar nature. Let's say they're handling some loss of of a parent, and maybe there was an earlier loss of a loved one, a brother, sister, aunt, uncle, grandmother, dog, something like that per Scientology theory, the trauma is, that is contained in the later incident is anchored by the earlier incident and earlier. And this is one way that Scientologists get into past lives and stuff, is recalling these incidents, going back further and further and further. During an auditing session, a pre-clear, the person who's receiving the counseling, is free to express themselves in any way they want. There are no brakes put on a pre-clear in an auditing session. And one of the reasons that Scientology auditors are trained with those drills, those communication drills where they sit and stare at somebody for hours, and where they get taunted and teased and what's called bull baiting. This is a training action now for the auditors. One of the reasons they do those things in Scientology is to prepare the auditor to deal with anything that a pre-clear might say or do to them in the course of an auditing session. Because one of the guiding golden rules of auditing is that the auditor is there to help the pre-clear through whatever it is that comes up. And it is an inexcusable offense for an auditor to abandon a pre-clear, stop doing the auditing, or in any way what Hubbard called rabbiting, like taking off from the session when it's going. I mean, it's expected that once you start a session, you are going to go through to the end until that person has re-experienced whatever they need to experience and kind of come through it on the other side feeling better about the whole thing. And that is real, and that happens, and people do experience emotional and mental or spiritual, whatever word you want to use, they experience some relief in going through some of these incidents and confronting some of the things that have happened to them in the past. It's undeniable. I can't sit here and say that doesn't happen, because it does. And it happened to me, it's happened to other people. This is something that does bring about some benefit from Scientology counseling. Now, as I've said before, this is no endorsement of Scientology, because anything that happens in a Scientology auditing session can happen in any therapeutic counseling session with a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor or something like that. It doesn't have to be a Scientology setting in order for you to experience that kind of relief. And so I highly recommend that people stay away from Scientology, because there are other means and methods of reliving and experiencing and relieving oneself of the burden of loss and trauma that don't involve all the authoritarian crap that Scientology brings into the mix, right? And there are also other kinds of auditing procedures that are done that I think are damaging, which I've talked about before. Objective processing, for example, definitely puts you in a trance state. Definitely not a good thing to be doing to people. And so can some of this trauma relieving stuff. It's not like this stuff is fully workable on every single person it's ever done on. There are plenty of failures and plenty of instances where a person goes into a euphoric state, which is temporary. They get some temporary relief from whatever it is that they have experienced, but then it kind of, comes back in on them again later. So this is not, again, there's no endorsement of Scientology, but I am saying that there are people who have done this and have felt benefited by it. And that's about as fair a statement as I can make about it. So outside of auditing, in day-to-day life, and especially for staff members and Sea Org members, especially for them, you're expected to keep that emotional trauma and upset and things like that you might have, or be concerned or worried or upset about things. Outside of an auditing session, you're expected to keep that stuff bottled up. That is where I think that idea comes from. Scientologists are professionals at denial and at bottling up their emotions and at pretending that they are not feeling how they're actually feeling. Put a smile on your face. Everything's great all the time. The Scientology is the most wonderful thing in the world, and it's just making me so happy all the time. That kind of thing goes on in Scientology, and it's not good. That people are put into that, frame of mind where they feel that they need to be acting that way. But that is a different thing from what happens in the counseling session.